Welcome back to the channel. My name is Tim Yoon, and I'm here to give you part two of the data persistence videos where I show you how you can decouple your data service module from the rest of the SwiftUI view and view model. Previously, I had shown you how to do that where the blue panels over here, the modules view and view models, need not to be changed, and that we could just substitute in either a mock data service or a user default data service. And then I said you could use either Firebase or CoreData or any of these other kinds of things. On this next video that I'm doing right now, I'll show you how to incorporate the CoreData data service into your app. So we'll take a quick pause here so I can switch. Okay, I'm back in Xcode now, and I want to show you that I created the persistence file, which comes when you actually just create a new app. So when you say new and you create a project, and then you say create an app, next, and then you just keep the use core data and the host in cloud kit and include tests. When you do that, you get this file for free, persistence. And so you get that, you don't really need to change that. The other file that you get is the data service here, which is a core data module. If you wanted to create it from scratch, you would say new file, and then you would type in data here, and then you get the data model, and you could create the same thing. Okay, so we won't do that because I already have that data service. And in here, you, by default, you'll get something called an item under the entities title right here. So what we're going to do is leave that alone, because that'll create some errors if you just delete it. And I don't want to show you how to get rid of those errors right now. The main thing is to create a user entity, because if you remember from the previous video, and I really encourage you to see the previous video before you do this, we have something called a user model that we need to deal with. Okay, so let's go back to the core data. So it'll be data service module right here. And we created a user entity, created an ID, which is a UUID, a name, which is a string, and then a timestamp, which is a date. Okay, so now that you have done that, the next thing you need to do is go to this panel where it says, normally it would say class definition like this, but instead you need to switch this to manual, right? So user entity, and then you go to manual instead of class definition. Okay, so from there, then you can say, this is not good enough. I want fine-grained control over this user entity. So this is what you do. You go to editor, and then you create NSManagedObject. So let me just go back and show you that again. Editor, create NSManagedObject subclass. You click on that, and you say next, and then next, and then it will create files, and you hit create. Now I'm going to hit cancel because I've already done this. And then let me just cancel this out. But you will say yes. And what will happen is you're going to get these two files. One is going to be the class definition, which is a user entity and its managed object. The other one is going to be the properties that you get. So by default, you're going to get these things, and it will be an optional UUID, and it'll be an optional string, and it'll be an optional date. It'll come like this when you open this file up. Now, I've already gone in and changed all these things, so I'm going to change this back to a non-optional values. So when you make these non-optional values, then you have to create a an override public func called awake from insert. This is kind of the magic incantation you have to make to initialize these values. So super.await from insert, calling the super function, and then set primitive value. And then for the key, for the timestamp key, we're going to say date.now, which is the current date. And then for the key ID, we'll make that equal to UUID. And then for the key name, we're going to just call it a blank string. And what this will do is then it'll initialize the user entity that's created to these values. So that's what you need to do. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's go back to now the CoreData data service file that I would have created. So I created this already, so I want to just show you what you need to do here. So you need to import CoreData because we're going to be dealing with CoreData, and import combine. To be honest, I'm not sure if I actually needed that or not. Now we're going to make an extension to user just for convenience, and it's going to be an initializer that takes in the user entity and then just sets the initial values of ID to the entity ID, and the name is going to be equal to entity.name. Okay, so now we create something called a CoreData data service file, CoreData data service. And it's going to be of type, conform to the data service protocol. And if you recall, I created something called a CoreData data service protocol right here, and you should have seen this in the previous video. And it's going to have the get function, add function, update function, and delete function. And so you make this CoreData service conform to the data service. Okay. Then you create a @publish private var users user entity is equal to a blank array. Okay. Now comes the CoreData part. You're going to do private let manager equals persistence controller, and that's going to be injected in the initializer. And so we won't give it an initial value right here, but you do need the sort descriptors, which is a way that you can sort the user entities once they're being fetched. So it'll be of an array of sort descriptors, and it'll be an NS sort descriptor with a key, and we're going to sort it on timestamp right here, ascend equals true, and that'll keep the order in which these elements were created, the users. And later on, if you want to make it sorted by alphabetical, you can do things like that using these sort descriptors. Next is a private let fetch request is equal to an NS fetch request using a generic type, and you're going to fulfill that generic type with user entity right here, and then the entity name is user entity. So these things have to match in order for this to work. And then again, the initializer is a manager persistence controller. We're going to give it a default value of persistence controller.preview, which is a totally an in-memory persistence controller. It's not truly a permanent storage, but I'll show you how to change that and inject in the permanent one later. So now we'll say it's a self-that manager equals manager, i.e. the persistence controller. And then you're going to do fetch. Now, what is fetch? Well, let's go to this private set of private functions that we have here. Fetch, private func fetch, what it does is users equals try manager.container.viewContext.fetch using the fetch request that we had previously initialized. So this is a function, the fetch function, which is a member of ViewContext, which is a member of container, which is a member of manager. It throws, so it has to be in a do catch block. And so you're going to try to fetch that and get the results and put it into users. That's what fetch does. Now, if there is an error, then we'll just call it a fatal error, and then we'll just print that out. However, we don't expect this to happen unless there's some really funky things going on. Another private function that's required is a private func save. And what this will do is we'll try to save this. And the way it does is if save is a member of view context, which is a member of container, which is a container, which is a member of manager. And remember, manager is the persistence controller. So this function throws, so we'll catch if there's an error and just print it out. Again, I don't think that's going to happen unless something really weird is going on. Now, for production code, you may want to do something different, but most of the time this seems to work just fine. And then after you save, what you want to do is fetch it back from the database so that everything is going to be in sync. In other words, update the users with the data that you have saved. That's how it works. Okay. Now let's go up here again and talk about these other functions, which are public data functions. So let me just go ahead and mark that as public. Mark. And these are public funcs. And these are what allow us to do basically the CRUD type functions, you know. So here we go. Now, the get, that is what publishes the array of users. So we're going to remember the fetch function will then update users, which is an array of user entity. Okay. So then it's going to be $users. This is a publisher. It publishes the array of user entity. And we're going to do a try map. And as I said earlier in the other video, we need to do a try map because we need to produce a user array and error combination. So instead of just map, we need a try map. So when you do that, I'll go ahead and rewrite this so that you can see how this is all done. Okay, so try map, and then it's going to be a transform, hit enter. And what you're going to do is you're going to get $0. But instead of that, what we want to do is transform this. And that's going to be so I just had to refresh my memory. So what you do is a try map, and then you open the parentheses, and it gives you this transform function. You hit enter, and this is actually going to be an array of a user entity. So we'll just say it's user entities. And then what we'll do is we'll bring that in to this closure, and it'll be user entities. And we have to map that because we don't want to have user entities at this point. We want to convert user entity to a user. Okay, and remember we created this little extension up here to users where you can give it a user entity and it'll set it to the appropriate initial values. So we're going to say user entity. So this gets brought into right there, and that'll be returned. And then you'll end up getting an array of array of users instead of user entity. Okay, so then now we have to erase any publisher. So that gives us the proper get function so that it will conform to the data service protocol. Now let's talk about the add function. Okay, so let me just go over that again. What you do is you say let user entity equals user entity context manager that container that view context. So remember you need the view context to create a user entity. So a user entity has been created, and we'll set that ID equal to the user ID that was brought in by the function parameter, and then user entity name is equal to username, and user entity timestamp equals to date.now, so the current time. And then we have to save this. Now remember that what the save function does is it will save it and fetch the results back into the users. And then let's look at update. And update, what we're going to do is make sure that this user right here actually is in the array of users. So to do that, we'll say users.firstIndex where $0.id, which is each element in that user's array in sequence, equals their user ID. So that means you need to find at least one index, or the first index rather. Otherwise, you're just going to return because that user is not inside of the users. So users index.id equals user.id, users index.name equals user.name. So we're going to update that. We do not update the timestamp because I still want that order to remain the same as it was before. Then we have to call the save function again. And then finally is the delete function, index set. And the way we do this is a for index in index set manager.container.viewContext.delete users index. So this is the particular user entity that's found at that index. And then we save again. So that's really it for the CoreData service. Okay. CoreData data service rather. Now let's go back to the user list view. And if you will recall the preview right here, it used to be, let me just go back to the way it was before and Command Z it all the way back. It used to be user default data service like this. So what we do then is we'll just get rid of that and put in CoreData data service instead. You do have to give it the persistence controller that's going to be either a preview or for shared, whatever you need. And that's the only change you need to make in this file, okay? Which is the beauty of this architecture. What you do then is you go back to the data service app right here. Okay, remember now we made the persistence controller equals persistence controller.shared. Okay, so then we're going to say the VM is equal to user view model with a data service, CoreData data service with the manager that's going to be the persistence controller.shared. Now this .shared is no longer the .preview, so this will actually save. So then you call user list view with this view model right here. And if we run the app, it should work just fine. Let me bring that in here so you can see it. And it'll boot up in just a second. So I can just delete that, so we can start off fresh. And we're going to kill this just so that you know that it's been killed. There we go. Now let's add something. We're going to say add, John Smith. Okay, save. And there it is. And we can edit it. John Smith Jr., maybe. Okay, let's edit it. Let's kill it now. Killed. Restart. It's persistent. And we can add something else. We can say, hey, Mary, Jane, Doe. Bam, like that. And again, it's all saved just the way we want it to be. Kill the app and bring it back. And the data has persisted. So in summary then, what we was able to do is really just nicely swap out the user default data service with the CoreData data service. Let me just go back. And the way you do that is you just give the user view model a new CoreData data service. That's all you do. Right? Now, actually, I didn't even need this now that I think about this. Yeah, like that. So we can just build here just to make sure. So basically, you just have to inject in the new data service just like this. And the user list view really doesn't have to be changed at all, other than being given this user view model that has a different data service injected into it. And then the CoreData service, you have to have some familiarity with CoreData in order to make this work. Obviously, there are lots of kind of like things you just have to know and memorize, or just be able to copy in order to use CoreData. So what I will do is go ahead and put this up on the GitHub, and I'll put a link to that GitHub in the description. So you can get all the code here, and you can look at it and download it and study it and use it for your own purposes as you need. Okay, hopefully you enjoyed that. Like and subscribe. Please send me a comment. That really motivates me to continue making these videos. Bye for now. Catch you again soon.